MediaTech Ventures Community Spotlight brought to you by Insperity, powerful HR solutions with exceptional follow-through. HR that makes a difference. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Community Spotlight. I'm your host, John Zarrow, president, co-founder, MediaTech Ventures, here with the digital godfather of the music industry himself, Mr. Ted Cohen. How are you today, good sir?
I'm very good, actually. It was I had an evening of being out in the woods a bit and being in technology. We installed solar panels on an RV that my girlfriend has acquired, and when we got everything hooked up, it actually worked. So, yay, team.
That's awesome. I definitely need to talk about the RV life a little later in the interview. That seems like a really interesting endeavor for you and the girlfriend moving forward. But I want to go back because a lot of your interviews, a lot of the information that's out there about your career is exactly that. It's about your career. But I want to go back to what really inspired you to pursue a career in the entertainment industry. And maybe it was a person, maybe it was something that happened. I'm curious as to what that story is.
It's interesting. I can't give you an exact date, but I know that, I loved music from the beginning, and I grew up in Cleveland. My family was in Cleveland, and we would say we were down the lake from Detroit, from a radio station called CKLW, which was a, I don't know, not even 50,000 watt. It was a 100,000 watt clear channel station that was clear channel, not the broadcasting network, but what they referred to as a clear channel frequency that no one else was on 800 anywhere in the country. And it was at the time that Motown was breaking. And so it was the best of Motown plus, the Four Seasons and a lot of the early rock groups like the Shangri-Las. There was a lot of Phil Spector. So I really loved music, but my parents, I joke I'm a nice Jewish kid from Shaker Heights, Ohio. And my parents my mother threw my bar mitzvah party. And as a play on words, there used to be a place in New York called the Copacabana. And so my mother did an evening at the Cohen Cabana, starring Ted Cohen in his first appearance as a man. Ha. So she ended up hiring a guy named Mike Douglas that none of you probably have ever heard of, but ask your parents. She hired Mike Douglas, not Michael Douglas, the actor, but Mike Douglas, the singer. He had a TV show, the Mike Douglas Show in Cleveland, that had just launched. And my mother called a friend of hers at the radio station, at the TV station rather, KYW, radio and TV, and said, I want to hire a singer for my son's bar mitzvah. And here's what the thing is. She had used this guy to MC other parties she had done. And she ended up hiring Mike for $50 because he was a nice Irish Catholic boy from Chicago who had never been to a bar mitzvah, or I think anything else that was not Irish Catholic. And a few months after, it was a nice evening. And as an aside, I was joking with John before we started about trying to give short answers to questions, and already I want to cut my own mic cord.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. We just started. We're good.
No, it's all right. So I got a call from a woman named Mary Ann Moyer, who was Mike's secretary, called my mother. And again, you'll figure out this is before there were answering machines even. Forget voicemail. There were no answering machines. And said, we have a band coming in from London to play the show before they go to New York. And Mike thought Ted might want to come down. They're called the Rollingstones, as he heard of them.
Wow.
So I'm 14 years old. I go down to the Mike Douglas show. I'm backstage with them. I was like Mike's sort of pet at this point. And I meet the Rolling Stones. That was succeeded by meeting over the next year and a half, the Beach Boys, the Byrds, Chad and Jeremy, Peter and Gordon. I went to see the Rolling Stones do their first show in Cleveland. I saw the Beatles do their first two concerts. When people say, what was your first concert? I go, the Beatles. And they go, okay, that's cool. So it was fun. And when I turned 16, Mike got me a job between Mike and his secretary, Mary Ann. She now married a guy, named Jim Gallant. She's now Mary Ann Gallant. And Jim is doing the weekend Saturday night show on KYW, and I'm answering phones. And this week it's the Four Seasons versus Martha Reeves and the Vandellas. And I would keep score, and I would tear news off the telefax machine, and I would get coffee for him. And then I started managing bands. So to wind this all up, I ended up in high school managing a guy named Eric Carmen, who was famous for a song called All By Myself. And I went on, and all through high school, I was putting on shows, managing bands, negotiating with the principal. The end of the story is my people ask me, what's the best deal you've ever done? I got called into the principal's office, and the assistant principal said, we want to book your band for the prom. You want $1,000. We only have 800, but what if we give you 800 and we get rid of all your demerits and detentions? And I had to go back to the band and say, I can only get you $800. It was terrible.
That's awesome.
I'm still friends with them.
That's wild. So you kind of fell into this world of management, it sounds like, but I know that was this during the time that you were assistant buyer at Disc Records?
Well, that was later. So what happened?
Okay.
I'll try and do this quickly. I also started getting interested in equipment. I mean, literally, when the Beatles did the Ed Sullivan Show, Ampex, the tape company, was making a home reel-to-reel black and white video recorder that I almost convinced my parents to buy me so I could record bands that were on the Ed Sullivan Show. So there was this parallel love of what technology, recording technology was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up getting a stereo reel-to-reel recorder. I would record the bands at rehearsal, but I was good in science and whatever. So I ended up going to Ithaca College in Ithaca, New York, as a pre-med major, as a science major. It turns out nobody went to Ithaca College as a science major. They were thrilled to get me. But they did have this huge broadcast department, communication school. And I found out the week I got there that Rod Serling from Twilight Zone was teaching there. He lived in Ithaca.
Wow.
And I ended up switching majors. I switched into communications. I had Rod Serling for a teacher.
That's
we used
incredible.
to hang out 3 or 4 nights a week in a place called the Athens Restaurant down on State Street in Ithaca. And I broke my mother's heart. She didn't get a doctor, but I could play one on TV. And I got, again, involved in putting on shows and doing all this crazy stuff. So at the end of my sophomore year, I had a professor that said, you skate, you do we talk about in technology, minimum viable product. Mm-hmm. I was doing minimum viable education. And it was, I would read the textbook the night before the midterm or the final, and I'd get a C or whatever. I was coasting because I was so excited there were a lot of bands in the Ithaca area. One of them ended up being Ronnie Dio, who ended up, being the lead singer in Black Sabbath years later. So I got sent home for a semester. And when I came back to Cleveland, I talked my way into a school, John Carroll University, and ended up running the radio station a week later. And they had a radio station that was running the Bible Hour. And I went, are you kidding? So, again, it was a Jesuit college, and, Ted Cohen took over the radio station. It was great. We built the pyramids. I figured I could run a radio station. So my parents threw me out.
They threw you out?
Well, they threw me out because they said, either quit the radio station, you're screwing up again. You're too interested in music and not interested enough in school. I left. I'm now living in my car. And I'm living above the radio station in the bell tower, just below the real bells that went off at 8 a.m. every morning.
That's a good alarm.
So I did that for a semester. And while I was doing that, I ended up meeting a guy named Billy Bass. Billy was a disc jockey at Wixie 1260, which was the rock station in Cleveland. And I became like Billy's sidekick. And I'd hang out at the station every night. And I sort of slowly but quickly stopped going to class. I'm hanging out with Billy. His roommate, this really great guy, Lynn Doyle, was the buyer at Disc Records. And Disc at the time was a chain of record stores, 34 stores around the country. They were in Indiana, Texas, California, New York, and Ohio. And next thing I know, I'm the co-buyer with him. So I've gone from living in my car to getting an apartment. I'm now, he and I are, excuse me, we're doing the buying for the chain. I'm trying to get Simon Cowell's endorsement here. And I was having people like Neil Bogart, who ended up creating Casablanca Records, coming in to see me. I mean, I'm like 20 years old, and I've got like,
wow,
people who ended up running Geffen Records and Casablanca Records, Eddie Rosenblatt, who ended up running Warner and then Geffen, saying, hey, when Billboard calls next week, tell them how good our records are doing. And I'm getting stacks of tickets to go to shows and stacks of albums to give my friends. And it was a lot of fun. And I ended up going to work for Columbia Records, and it went from there. So I'm pausing.
So no, that's actually a really good pause, is Columbia Records, and then when was the how long were you at Columbia Records before you?
I was there less than a year. So what happened was,
because then you moved to Warner.
As I said, Billy Bass sort of adopted me. He introduced me to people. I ended up meeting the folks at Columbia Records, and I met Marty Mooney and Frank DeLeo, who were the local guys. Marty was the Columbia guy, and Frank was the Epic guy. And this guy Bud Reeland was the branch manager. They used to have like local record branches, sales offices, and they liked me. And they said, "There's a job open in Cincinnati. Go down and interview for it." So I drove from Cleveland down to Cincinnati, and I interviewed for the local promotion job. And after the interview, I called Bud and I said, "I think the interview went well. When will I know if I have the job?" And he said, "You had the job before you left Cleveland. You just had to do the interview." He basically had told a guy named Bill Kelly, who was the branch manager in Cincinnati, hire this kid. So I have this thing the rest of my life about mentoring and helping people and whatever, because some really nice people adopted me and moved me along. Frank DeLeo ended up managing Michael Jackson.
Wow.
And he managed Michael during Beat It and Off the Wall and that whole period. And they adopted me. They moved me along. Steve Popovich, who ran Columbia Records, was very nice to me. But our branch manager, Bill Kelly, got let go, and they brought in a new person, and everything changed. It could be a whole show on. It went from do what you need to do and get it done to come in every morning at 9 o'clock and don't leave before 6. And if you leave, call in every 30 minutes, let us know where you are, and wear a suit and tie every day, and I'm out of here. So I went to Warner. I realized very quickly, both at Columbia and then at Warner, I enjoyed working with artists more than I enjoyed going into radio stations saying, please play our new Paul Revere and the Raiders Indian Reservation record. My area was Cincinnati, Columbus, Dayton, Louisville, Indianapolis. And I always use this example. There's a guy named Ron Vance at a radio station in Dayton, Ohio called Wing, W-I-N-G, because Dayton was where the Orville and Wilbur Wright started. It's the home of aviation. And he would ask me a question like, how is the Paul Revere record doing in New York? And I went, Ron, it doesn't work like that. See, first the record gets played here in Dayton, then it gets played in New York. If it was played in New York right now, I wouldn't be here asking you to please play the record. So radio station I loved a lot of them, but there were some that were a little nutty. There was America had a song, Horse with No Name.
Mm-hmm.
And so somebody came up with the really bright idea of, why don't we, in key markets, give away horses?
No way.
So in Louisville, Kentucky, and I don't think you've ever heard this one before, in Louisville, Kentucky, I set up win the horse with no name, and you get to name him after you win him. And I set this up with a guy named Johnny Randolph at WAKY, Wacky in Louisville. And you used to have to, every other week I would drive to Indianapolis one week, Louisville the next week, Columbus the next week, then back to Indianapolis. It was a circuit around Cincinnati. And I'm in Louisville, and I'm in the studio with Johnny, and it's lunchtime. And I said, whatever happened with the horse with no name contest? He said, oh, yeah, I'll fill you in on that in a minute. And he goes on the air and goes, it's 12:05 in Louisville. This is Johnny Randolph. Next caller wins a horse. I went, pardon? So he never did the contest. He gave the next caller won a horse. He didn't even explain that it was America or whatever. The horse that we bought turned out to be sick. The guy who won the horse worked for the Kentucky Derby. He worked at Churchill Downs. He ended up suing the radio station for getting a horse that wasn't fit to be dog food. And we had to pay another $5,000 to the winner, even though it was given away on a next caller wins a horse. So dealing with radio wasn't a lot of fun, but dealing with bands was. So I started hanging out with bands. So when I was at Columbia, I became close with the guys in Chicago, the guys in Blood, Sweat, and Tears. There was a guy named Don Ellis. Santana was around, but he hadn't come to. Actually, I met Santana one time when I worked with Columbia, and subsequently worked with him later. But I realized I loved going to shows, and so when I went to Warner, I started going to every concert of everybody in the area, and I started getting kidnapped by bands in terms of they would say, why don't you come on the tour bus with us and come to St. Louis? And so I'd end up calling my boss from St. Louis going, hi, Alice Cooper kidnapped me, said, get on the plane, come with us. After a couple of years, almost 3 years of that bad behavior, they moved me into artist development, which was working with the bands. And I became good at basically telling bands why the radio interview probably wasn't going to change their life, but it was going to change the DJ's life. Mm-hmm. And we were going to sell more tickets and they were going to sell more. I basically went not to their level because that sounds bad, but instead of saying, we got to go do this, it's really important. And what it's like, this is part of what we have to do. You got to go to the radio station. You got to do the interview. You got to meet the folks backstage. You got to meet the buyer from the local record store. I got into a rhythm of working with developing artists and also being able to tell bigger artists, look, let's just go do it and then we'll all go have drinks. It'll be fun.
So I think that, and that's really, that's interesting because it combines some of what you saw, maybe some of your frustrations working in the actual radio stations, right? With now kind of the artist development and bringing those two experiences together. And I mean, your career with Warner, I mean, the band number and some of the most iconic bands come to mind. From Alice Cooper, Doobie Brothers, Fleetwood Mac, The Who, Van Halen, Prince, Talking Heads, Robert Palmer, the Beach Boys, Sex Pistols. I mean, a lot of these bands had a lot of influence on me as a musician. So to the fact that you were there when they were, doing it in their prime and up and coming is a dream of mine to even know what that was even like. So I want to talk a little bit about what
we're talking about the pivot.
Well, no, not yet, actually.
Okay.
Because because the pivot, I think a lot of people do know about the pivot, and we'll certainly get to that because we want to talk about the future of this industry a little bit with you. But more importantly, what were some of your best, your top 3 moments that come to mind when you were in artist development at Warner from an experience standpoint?
I think, they both actually involve Mick Jagger. I fell into 2 categories of who I worked with. I worked with what we referred to affectionately as baby bands, and I worked with some iconic superstars who had been traditionally difficult. And like I said, with the superstars, I got into a rhythm of being able to convince them, to do stuff that they'd never done before. I mean, with the Beach Boys, I had Carl Wilson and Dennis Wilson doing interviews every day. I had them meeting folks. I had the Beach Boys doing in-stores. They'd never done this since, the 60s. But I think the most interesting assignment was Prince. And watching that explode, I worked with Prince the first 4 years, from Dirty Mind up to Purple Rain. And watching that grow and just watching somebody who knew who he was. He didn't become Prince. He was Prince. I mean, it was there. And I always tell people, when they ask me, what did you do? I say, I gave advice. I had no advice for Prince other than, wow. I mean, it was just amazing to watch.
Do that again tomorrow.
Do it again tomorrow. It was just amazing. But in the case of like Van Halen, I mean, I told the joke is I would say to David Lee Roth, you're talking too much. And I would say to David Byrne from the Talking Heads, please say something. Just stop looking at your shoes and say something. You know, you have your eyes down on the floor all the time. So, you know, and in a lot of cases, it was, you know, for instance, you mentioned Robert Palmer. Robert was just one of the most wonderful people I ever knew, and he died way too young. I mean, literally way too young. He loved music, and there are some people that appropriate stuff. Robert was not. Robert didn't, like, you know, try and see, okay, what's hot right now, I'm going to do that. He would collaborate. So he worked with Little Feat on Sneaking Out, and the Meters on Sneaking Sally Through the Alley. He worked with Gary Newman, who did, you know, Cars, in Cars. Gary Newman ended up producing his album. I introduced him to Chrissie Hynde from the Pretenders, and he co-wrote with her. He was an amazing guy. But to answer the question, I feel like I'm doing a debate. You asked a question, I'm answering a different one. You know, we feel that the Voting Rights Act.
Your time's up.
Your time's up. So, but I'm speaking. The most interesting thing was Mick Jagger came to the Ritz in New York to see Prince. And it was really exciting. Mick Jagger was sitting in the audience watching Prince do his first show at the Ritz, the Dirty Mind Tour, and asked Prince to open at the LA Coliseum at the end of the tour. So having Mick Jagger asking to open for the Stones was probably, you know, a great moment for him. That segued into Prince being booed off stage at the LA Coliseum in less than 2 minutes. People throwing bottles and cans at him from the audience.
Wow.
And then coming back the next day, because it was a 2-day thing that they played the Coliseum 2 days in a row. So the second day, it was a contest for the audience on the second day to see if they could get Prince off stage quicker than the audience did on Saturday. The first day I went to the show, as I'm walking in to go to the stage, because Prince had just started, I got there late. They were coming off stage. So the second day I got there early, and I think we were on stage for less than 2 minutes, and it was over. But, I mean, The Who was wonderful to work with. Little Feat was amazing. I mean, I used to joke that they pay me to do this, and if they didn't pay me, I'd pay them.
Right.
But I always explain, you haven't asked me the question, but I'll answer, you know, that a large part of what I do now and how I ended up doing it was a combination of serendipity and just being, you know, by happenstance in the right place at the right time. So in 1977, I'm in Chicago with a gentleman that owned Advent Speaker Company. And he had invited me to come to Chicago with him to go to the Consumer Electronics Show, which used to be.
Oh, good. Well, actually, so this actually does kind of, that's a perfect segue, because I know Spinal Tap was a pivotal moment when you shifted completely.
Well, that was
I feel like the precursor to that was in '82, right? You were a part of a crew on a cross division, right, between Warner Records and Atari.
Right.
But even before that, you were at CES, where again you would meet Jobs and Wozniak. So talk a little bit about that experience.
Yeah. So Advent had come out with the first consumer projection. Well, at least the first that I'm aware of that was successful was called the Advent Video Beam, and they had it was a home. They were pushing the concept of a home theater, and so they had taken a suite. They had booked a suite at the Drake Hotel on Michigan Avenue, and I think you know where that is. And they had turned the bedroom into a home theater, and they're demoing this projection TV. And these two homeless-looking guys walk in jeans and scruffy hair and scruffy beard, and they have a brown zipper canvas case with them. And we're like, "Hi, can we help you?" I'm hanging out. I'm just hanging out there. I mean, I'm working at Warner at the time, but I'm hanging out with all the Advent people. And they said, "Yeah, we want to show you something." And they open up this brown zipper case, and they go, "This is the Apple I computer. It's going to change the world." And they were there to trade an Apple I computer for an Advent Video Beam, because the Apple I computer was the first computer that did color graphics natively, that you could plug the Apple I into the Video Beam input and have color graphics on a projection screen. Somebody ended up with the Apple I. They ended up with a video. The trade was made. But I was then hanging out at the electronics show, and Atari was there showing the Atari computer. No, there's Atari game system. I meet the Atari people. A year later, they come out with the Atari 400 and 800, and I'm hanging out with Atari now, which is, like you said, owned by Warner, and I become sort of the unofficial liaison. In '82, we started this group that was Alan Kay, who invented the mouse. He invented the graphic interface at Xerox PARC, Palo Alto Research Center. And so it was me and Alan Kay and Stan Cornen, who was one of my other bosses, who was a true visionary. If anybody listening or watching, Google Stan Cornen and look up his speech that he gave the day radio died. It's posted on, it's up there. It's an amazing look at how do we discover music without radio. And he did this speech in '79.
Wow.
So I end up on this committee looking at what is going to be the impact of the personal computer on the entertainment industry. And this was a year before CDs came out. CDs came out in '83. So the premise of this work group between the Warner Music Group and Atari was, once CDs, are ubiquitous and people get used to a digital music format, what else will they want to do? So in '82, we talked about ripping CDs, streaming, downloading, but at the time.
So hold on a second. I want to pause there for a minute, because I think people don't understand the history of streaming music. And it's incredibly wild that in 1982, in this brain trust, here you are talking about this was pre-internet, right?
No, internet started in '79. So internet started in '69. DARPA created the internet, not the web. The web started in '95.
Right, but from a capability standpoint, it just was
to be
so
able to
far.
to have TP a file started in 1969. DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research
And
Group.
So, here we are talking about it in '82. It's wild because CDs reigned supreme for so long, even late into the '90s.
Right. Well, what was interesting about it was, at the time, I had an Atari. I started basically going back to CES for a moment when I said to, this guy's name was Peter Sprague. When I said to Peter, why would I want to go to the electronics show? He says, you'll figure it out really quick. And it became, I've got albums and concert tickets. You've got a Pioneer receiver. I'd like that receiver. Would you like 100 Fleetwood Mac albums to send to your dealers to play in store? I mean, I would come up with business reasons for it, but I would end up with a receiver. So I started acquiring a lot of equipment, which today gets stupid. But I ended up, Atari set me up with an Atari 800 computer, the company called Hayes did smart modems. I had a 300-bit modem, not 300K, not 300 meg, 300 bits. It took as long to send an email as it does to download the Godfather trilogy now. There was no bandwidth, 16K of memory, not meg or gig. Storage medium was a cassette drive.
Wow.
Not a floppy drive or a hard drive. So you didn't have the band, and it was a 4 megahertz processor, not gigahertz. So you had a computer with no horsepower, no speed, no memory, but we're talking about all these when the bandwidth is there, when the storage is there. A blank CD in '85 to record a recordable CD. We used to, a gold disc, we used to refer to as a gold disc, was $100. A CD burner in '86 was $20,000. In 1990, a CD burner came with your computer for free.
That's right. I mean,
the acceleration of the medium, a blank CD was $100, and 5 years later, a blank CD was at one point $1 and then 50 cents, and then how many would you like?
Buy 100 for $10.
Right, exactly. And then make coasters out of them for AOL. So, but we talked about the concepts. And I always admit the one thing that we never discussed, all of this was happening from a central server. In other words, if you were going to download music, you would download music from the Warner Records or the Sony Music music
library.
server. The concept of peer-to-peer, even though I knew that I could FTP a song to you and you could FTP it to someone else, the concept of peer-to-peer file sharing and peer-to-peer sharing of whether legal or illegal, just the transmission of entertainment data wasn't part of what we talked about. But we did talk about, basically the equivalent of a mixtape. It was an interesting thing. At the same time, I'm still on the road with bands. So to get to the other pivot, I'm on the road with bands. 82 was the best year of my life in terms of touring. I'm out with Prince. I'm out with The Who. I'm out with Asia. I'm out with Van Halen. I'm out with Fleetwood Mac. I'm going from one tour to another. My expenses, and I'm flying on Fleetwood Mac's plane. I'm flying on The Who's plane. I'm on Van Halen's bus. My expenses in 1982 were $250,000.
Wow.
A lot of dinners. And this is, there's always jokes about the flower budget. This was not drugs. This was take The Who out to dinner 4 nights. I was on The Who tour for 4 months. I was out with Fleetwood for 3 months. These were legitimate expenses. And we could talk about things I know that, are not as legitimate that I only witnessed. Anyway, 82 was an amazing year. 83, it started out with me going out with Roxy Music, and it just didn't work. Brian Ferry, the leader of Roxy Music, turned out to be just a real dick. I'm sorry. He was a jerk. And I had been excited since the first Roxy Music album, since hearing Virginia Plain.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to work with Brian Ferry, and he just turns out to be the jerk of life.
Oh.
And it's the first tour I ever leave. A month later, 2 months later, I go out with Asia. I had done the 82 tour where they sold 10 million albums, sold out every date. Just the most amazing time I ever had with a developing artist. They were a put together super group, but they went from 0 to 10 million albums in 6 months.
Wow.
The next year, they're not speaking to each other. They're staying in separate hotels. They have separate tour managers. They hate each other. And it's the second tour I leave. And then my boss at Warner, my main boss, a guy named Bob Reguer, was diagnosed with, he had cancer in his face, in his jaw, and his jaw crumbled one day. He went to have a tooth pulled, and the dentist went to pull his tooth, and his jaw
came with it.
Wow. He's dying. I had the 2 worst tours of my life, and I decided I really don't want to be on the road anymore. And I go to Mo Austin, the chairman of Warner, and I said, I just need to get off the road for a little while. Assign me temporarily to marketing or creative services, merchandising, or promotion. But if I stay on the road with bands, I'm going to kill a band. I know it will help their catalog sales. We'll sell a lot of, memorial box sets, but I'll be in jail. He says, but you're so good at what you do. So I'm staying on the road, but I'm trying to stay off the road as much as possible. I had one of the other wonderful experiences was working with King Crimson, Robert Fripp and Tony Levin and Bill Bruford. And I'm out with them for a few dates. They end up in LA. They call me up on a Sunday night. It happens to be my 10th anniversary of being on the road with bands in artist development for Warner. And they said, we're going to the Beverly Center tonight to see this movie, Spinal Tap. It's a comedy about touring. So I go with them to the Beverly Center, and I'm laughing during the first 30 minutes. Then I'm kind of quiet during the next 30 minutes. And I think I was crying the last, because it was everything. A guy, and I always blank on his name, so it doesn't matter. A guy, ex-Chrysalis Records guy, was hired by Rob Reiner and Harry Shearer and Michael McGeehan and Christopher Guest to go out and get the worst road stories ever. And he, basically everything in the movie was based on a band telling him about a horrible experience. So if you haven't seen Spinal Tap, I recommend. They're actually doing a reunion show as part
Saw
of
that.
see the reunion show. I ended up working for one of them last year, which turned out to be a dream. We go to see the movie, and the movie just is a gut punch in terms of everything is Spinal Tap. It is ridiculous. The radio station where they didn't know the band was still together, the in-store where nobody shows up, the crazy girlfriends of the band, the wives and girlfriends that want to manage the band. And I ended up going to Mo Austin's office the next day, the morning after the movie, and I resigned.
Wow.
And I ended up going to work at Westwood One, which was a radio syndicate. And I stayed there for a year. I then went to work for a guy named Sandy Gallen, who managed Dolly Parton, Barbra Streisand, Neil Diamond, the Pointer Sisters, Donny Osmond. And after I left, managed Milli Vanilli, and learned about the really deep dive into the management side of business. And then ended up joining a label that was starting calling Cypress. We were signing a bunch of ex-Warner artists and a bunch of ex-Columbia Records artists. So we signed Jesse Colin Young and Wendy Waldman and Jennifer Warnes. And we were an all-digital label. And because we were an all-digital label, and this is, again, one of these happenstance, we got a call from somebody who said, we want to rent your digital 2-track and your digital multi-track to start doing what was referred to as elastic music. That depending on how you interacted with the CD-ROM, it was going to be a CD-ROM project, you could change the mix on the fly by turning on and turning off different tracks through the interface. Ended up hanging out with Philips, ended up going to work at Philips, produced a title for the Cranberries, oversaw titles for Santana and for the Horde Festival, Dave Matthews and Blues Traveler, etc., and learned about producing CD-ROMs. And over the time that Philips Media existed, this CD-ROM division, they spent $1 billion, literally. It was whatever it costs, go do it. And then all of a sudden, the new head of Philips in Holland said, we're shutting you down, something about spending $1 billion. I don't know why. They were upset. So they shut it down. And I started consulting to just fill the time. I started consulting for a bunch of digital music startups had started popping their head out around 95. So I had been the honorary chairman of a conference called Musicom, which was the intersection of music and technology. And that's where I first met our dear friend, Mark Cantor, and tried to kill him then, but I've been unsuccessful in every attempt. Mark, we love you. So I run this conference for a couple. No, he will. He'll watch. I'm sending him a note. Mark's a great guy. Mark created Macromedia Director, which became the basis of most multimedia for a bunch of years. It eventually became Flash, was bought by Adobe. Mark's a genius, but he makes me easy. He makes me look easy to get along with. So I always, when everybody complains, I go talk to Mark and come back and go, no, you're great. We like you. So anyway, I ended up with 25 clients between 97 and 2000. I was representing virtually almost everybody out there except eMusic.
So stop there for a second.
Good. Yeah,
I want to talk a little bit about this transition because it's an important transition. With your years of experience on the industry side, here you are now in the midst of consulting, dozens of technology-focused, right, entertainment organizations.
Right.
What was the landscape like back then? Right. So what were these companies trying to do? And how were people finding out, again, because a lot of this was kind of up and coming. It was very new. Right. So there's the element of people are trying new things with technology and making it work. And then there's the element of how do people find people that are doing this and helping it continue to grow and be successful?
Well, I gave a talk literally a year ago, almost today, at a conference that's happening this week virtually in New York called Mondo. And I made a point. There was a good friend of mine and of a lot of people by the name of Jay Frank, and Jay had ended up basically solidifying the concept. I want to get the right words here. We had talked in 2006, 2007 about playlists and mixtapes. He took that concept and basically said it's much easier to break a record online through a playlist on eventually Spotify and Apple and Amazon than it is to just say, here's a new song, listen to it. So I always talk about the fact that technology is important, but it's the people who are involved. And it ended up that some great people who were music people ended up getting involved in music and tech, and I was honored to work with them. I mean, there's a guy like Ty Roberts, who was at a company called Ion that did a David Bowie CD-ROM and did a Todd Rundgren thing called The Individualists and The Residents. There was Howie Singer, who was at Warner Music Group, who became the CTO, but he was, in a lot of cases, it was people who were interested in the web, went from being, quote, the webmaster to being the CTO, the CIO. There's an amazing gentleman by the name of Ian Rogers, who currently is in Paris working for LVMH, which is Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. He started out in high school. He wrote to the Beastie Boys and said, you need a website. He's in high school. He ends up creating the Beastie Boys website. He goes on to run Yahoo Music, be the first GM of Beats, excuse me, and then ends up doing this amazing right turn, going to Paris, and he's the global chief digital officer for LVMH. So a lot of great people that were music people. Dick Wingate, a friend of mine, was promotion and marketing and artist development at Arista. There's a woman who I always spar with. I mean, we have a friendly, it's a love relationship. It's a love, little bit of hate relationship. Debbie Newman. She was the music video person at Columbia. She became really involved in the visual side of this stuff. So a lot of people love music who also had a passion for technology kind of evolved into this. And the first companies were companies like Music Match, which was it basically was a radio player for everything on your hard drive. It looked at all the music that you had ripped from your CDs and created, a jukebox. There was Liquid Audio. There was Rioport. I ended up consulting for Amazon on the first, when they created the music store, which was the second vertical after books back in '98. It was a really interesting time. And we all were kind of, feeling our way through it. And then there was a big dot-com crash in 2000, where a lot of companies had become, extremely overvalued. And then there was a market correction on April 14th in 2000, where a lot of companies basically saw their valuations, they went to 10% of what they had been worth the day before.
Right. So I want to, you mentioned a lot of different conferences, and when throughout your career did these conferences start to become, obviously you were at CES in the early 80s, but when did you go from attending to speaking? And, because I feel like that space was a pretty small pool back in the day, right?
Right. Well, but there was an interesting transition where I went from speaking. I started speaking early because we talked, there was a new music seminar that was Tommy Silverman from Tommy Boy Records conference in New York. There was CMJ, College Media Journal, which is Joanne Haber and Bobby Haber. And so I was speaking at these conferences of how do you break an artist? How do you use, we talk about technology. In 1975, with a friend of ours that you work with now, Norm Weiner, who ended up back in Chicago at WXRT, he was running WBCN in Boston. We would do Little Feat live from the Orpheum Theater. When the night of their show, we'd have to wait till the show was almost sold out. And at 6, 7 o'clock, they would announce, Warner Brothers artist, Little Feat live tonight, instant radio spectacular. A few years later, excuse me, it's a webcast. A few years later, it's Live Aid being broadcast all over the world. So the concept of connecting people with music just continually got enhanced by technology. But the desire to connect was always there. So if you couldn't go to Little Feat, you heard it on the radio. If you couldn't be at Live Aid in Philadelphia or London, you saw it worldwide through a worldwide live broadcast. You know, most people would remember Phil Collins was, has the unique distinction of playing in London and then getting on the Concorde, flying to Philly and playing in Philly the same day. He played Live Aid twice that day. They got I think it's the only time the Concorde ever landed in Philadelphia. So technology, where people worry about how technology, has hurt the music business, the music business had to realign. But in terms of helping people connect with music and helping people enjoy music, we're going through this, as we're in the middle of this, pandemic. In 2012, a guy named Evan Lowenstein started Stage It, which was the ability to stream, to webcast from your living room and do a show if you weren't out on tour.
Mm-hmm.
For 8 years, it remained an amazing idea that was underutilized. The pandemic comes along. Stage It has done more shows in the last 6 months than they did in the first 8 years. They ended up hiring a great guy, Stephen White, who had been at Grace Note and then at Dubset.
He's a great guy.
Who's a really great guy, and he's blowing it up and big. VR. You have what Travis Scott did in Fortnite recently, and what Marshmallow did.
Yeah, you've got your Wave VRs, right?
You've got Wave VR, right? And everybody's looking for what the right hook is.
So, this is actually that's a good segment. Just some notable mentions, right. Some breadcrumbs along the way that we didn't get a chance to talk about was EMI, right?
EMI was great. EMI was great, but I want to go back to the conference thing for a moment, because I ended up speaking artist development, and that segued into technology, and it segued into me getting approached to do that thing, Musicom.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody came. So then the same time I got hired by Amazon, and I have to tell this really quickly. I come off stage at the Beverly Hilton. I just done an opening keynote talking about the potential for digital music, and a woman walks up to me and she goes, "Hi, my name is Jennifer Cast. I'm general manager at Amazon.com. Pause. Have you heard of us?" She was like employee number 10. They ended up hiring me to do that. Two people also walked up to me. They had a news service called Web Noise, and they said, "You shouldn't be speaking at other people's conferences. You should be a partner in your own conference. Why don't you join us as a partner in Web Noise?" So we did Web Noise in 98, 99. I had this young guy, Mark Cuban, come speak. I had Eileen Richardson, who was the interim CEO at Napster, which I almost went to work. I consulted for. And the people from MEDEM were there. MEDEM is for those of you who don't know, MEDEM is a music conference that happens every year, but this year for the last almost 50 years in Cannes, in France, Cannes. And they came up to me and they said, "Can you?" I know it's Cannes, Cannes. I don't know, but it's down on the French Riviera. It's beautiful. They said, "Could you create MEDEMnet? Could you create a digital conference for us?" So for 12 years, I ran MEDEMnet. My thing is always getting the smartest people in the room. And I also want to say one other thing, and then you can edit this out, shut me up, whatever. When we did Web Noise the second year in 99, we did it at the Century Plaza Hotel in LA.
Mm-hmm.
And we had 2,000 people. And it was like Woodstock for digital music. And my partners at the time, I comped 500 people, because there were people who had, because CDs, Napster had come along, and it had actually started early to hurt some labels. I would get a call from somebody saying, "I want to come to the conference, but I can't afford it." I'd say, bring me some Dunkin' Donuts from New York, and you're in. And whatever, whatever. I was comping the people that couldn't afford to go, because I wanted the room filled with the smartest people in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And we did it, and it was amazing. And there are people who still talk about that Web Noise. I don't think anything's ever happened better than that. Plug-in came along, and some other New Music Seminar did their digital version. But the idea of getting bright people together to talk was really important to me. And the other thing has been this whole mentor thing. And in 2003, I was at Canadian Music Week. Again, I'm talking about, I'd started speaking there about artist development, and then ended up transitioning when I went to Philips to talk about digital.
Mm-hmm.
A young gentleman named Daryl Ballantyne walked up to me in 2003 in the lobby of the Harbor Castle Hotel, the Westin in Toronto, and said, "I just heard your talk. I'd like to come to LA and intern for you at EMI." I had joined EMI in 2000 as SVP of Digital Business Development Global, and was having a lot of fun. Did the Rhapsody deal. We did the iTunes deal, the first iTunes deals. We were doing some great stuff. And he said, "I want to intern for you." He came to LA and interned for 6 months. He then started Lyric Find. Lyric Find is the world's first and largest licensed lyric service.
Huge.
And a few months later, he asked me to join the board. And I said, "Yeah, kid, sure, whatever." And I joined the board in late 2005, early 2006, just as I was leaving EMI. And I've been on the board now 15 years. And for the last 10 years, I've been consulting for Lyric Find. So basically, I'm on retainer with my intern. So it works out really good. If you meet smart people, whatever you can do to help, this is my advice, help them. You know, if you meet smart people that are not so nice, slap them a bit and then help them. I mean,
kick them under the table, right?
My example, I mean, there was somebody who I didn't do a lot for him, but I mean, I basically, sang his praises, put him on panels and whatever. I never actually worked with him. There was this young, arrogant kid in LA who was just a complete piece of work. And we did this small session for an organization here in LA. And I added him to the panel. And on the panel, I had William Morris Agency, Microsoft, Music Match, Universal Music Group, and this arrogant young kid. And everybody's going, "Why is he on the panel?" I go, "Look, I know he's a pain in the ass, but he's so smart." So Travis Kalanick went on to start Uber, and I think his current net worth is $5 billion. And he was a very smart, very arrogant person, and remained a very smart, arrogant person. But I was amazed on how smart he was. So sometimes they can't all be nice.
Isn't that the truth?
When I go to conferences, and this goes full circle, and then, I promise to shut up. 3 years ago, I got invited. I was at South by, and I got invited to come to Liège, Belgium, to a conference called Wallifornia. And again, I had a client. I have a client who's remained a friend named Vincent Favre, who lives in Switzerland.
Love Musimap.
And it was, at the time, Musimap was AI, artificial intelligence music recommendation, and they're one of the best companies at this in the world. But he recommended me to Wallifornia to speak, and I ended up meeting Jarreau. But at 2 a.m, here's where technology and all this comes together. I get a phone call. I get a message on Facebook, rather. I'm sorry, not a phone call. It's 2 a.m. I'm in Belgium. And somebody says, "You need to meet a friend of mine, Travis. He's out drinking right now, but he's going to send you a Facebook message with a location beacon on it." And I went, "Okay, cool." And I left the hotel at 2:30, and I walk. Think about the most suburban area wherever you live. It was like walking down the street. There was nobody. I mean, there was no one, but I'm following the beacon, and it's go down 3 blocks and over 2 blocks and over. All of a sudden, I'm in an area called Le Carré, the quarter. It's like 500 bars. My understanding is that when they open on Thursdays, they don't close till like 5 a.m. on Monday morning. So the bars are open 24 hours a day. There's a tequila bar. There's a whiskey bar. There's a bourbon bar. There's a beer with 500 taps of, whatever you want. But between each of them, there's a Belgian waffle stand. There's a Belgian fry stand. There's a Belgian crepe stand. I mean, I was in heaven. It was the best food and the best drink I've ever had. And at 3:30 a.m, I meet Travis and this wacky guy, John Cesaro. "Oh, I meet you." And we hang out from 3:30 in the morning to 7:30 in the morning. We then agree to meet for lunch that day. We meet for lunch and we agree to work together. And the reason I'm here right now is because Facebook Messenger, Beacon Technology got me to Travis, which got me to you, which got us to lunch. And, you know, I ended up a year ago officially joining MediaTech Ventures. And it all comes from a combination of great people and great technology.
So I want to add a little bit of color to that because I sat in on your keynote, which, by the way, is brilliant. Sea of Gray Hats. It's a fantastic presentation you give. And afterwards, I had walked up to you. I said, "Hey, that was a great presentation, right? I'm John Cesaro, MediaTech Ventures. Would love to chat. How do I get a hold of you?" And you said, "Add me." You know, I was like, "Can I just add myself to your phone?" And you're like, "Sure." So you gave me your phone, and I went to your Facebook, and then I added myself as a friend on your Facebook. And you looked at me and you said, "What did you just do?" I said, "I added myself on your Facebook." And you go, "Let me show you something really quick." And you had about 7,500 pending friend requests.
Right.
And so I remember I was like, "Oh, so I made the right choice." You're like, "I think so."
There was an opening. I literally, it's funny. People will say, "Well, you had me." I said, "Okay, let me go through the list." "Okay, I haven't talked to him in 6 months. Goodbye, you're out." I hover at 5,000. There was a woman, again, you talk about mentoring situations. A friend of mine asked me, would I spend some time with somebody up in Palo Alto? I was up there for a thing called Google Zeitgeist. And I met this woman in the lobby. Her name was Allie Rosenthal, and she was brilliant. And if you Google her, Allison Rosenthal, she's gone on, she's on a bunch of boards, whatever. But at the time, she had just graduated. And I said, you know, let me see if I can help you out. She called me a couple of weeks later, said she got hired by Facebook. And when Facebook opened up, I had met, I have to, you can edit this or whatever. I have, again, these, you know, like happenstance, serendipitous moments. On February 2005, on a Sunday, I don't know the date, it was Grammy Sunday, I get a phone call from a guy saying, "Can I come over? I want you to meet a friend of mine." And they come over and they said, "We want you to be on, join the board of our pirate music service. It's called Wirehog." And I said, "I really can't be on the board of a pirate music service. I work at EMI Music." And they said, "Well, you know, can you do it secretly?" "No, not really. But I'd really like to be on the board of that other thing you have." And he goes, "No, the board's all, the current board is all investors." He said, "The other reason we came over today is we're down here to try and get into the Grammys somehow. Nobody will put us on a list for any of the parties. We know you're working on, you mentioned the other day, you're working on the EMI party. Can you sneak us in?" I said, "Yeah, sure. Show up and pretend that you will just have some piece of paper in your hand that looks like an invitation, and I'll wave you in." So that night in 2005, whatever that Sunday was, February, I ended up having to sneak Mark Zuckerberg and Sean Parker into the EMI Grammy party. That's awesome. Because nobody would put them on a list. In return, Mark added me on Facebook. When you had to be a .edu, when it was only schools, I was sort of not grandfathered, but I was given early access to Facebook as a non, college student.
Right.
So anyway, end of the story is Allie goes to work for Facebook. Facebook opens up to the world. I start adding people. And they have this thing that if you add too many people, you get put in jail.
Right.
So one day I go to add people and it says, "Nope, you're in jail." And I called her up and I said, I knew how to get a hold of her. And I called her up and I said, "It's Ted." She goes, "What's up?" I said, "I'm too social." And so she said, "Look, I can't get you out of jail. You're going to be in jail for like 48 hours. When you come out of jail, they've taken all the limits off." So I went from like 0 to 5,000 friends. It was like everybody I knew. I was whatever. And then I ended up with a couple thousand extra, like inbounds, as you said. You started this. So every time, if I met somebody like you happen to click on the phone when there was an opening. Usually someone says, "I tried to friend you," and it says that you aren't accepting. Right. And so, yeah, I never really liked him. Okay, he's out. But I mean, to bring this all home, and then you can bring it home the way you want to. my career has been, a lot of people have been very nice to me, and I try and be nice to a lot of people. And I'll give everybody the benefit of the doubt for either being, naive or whatever. I never try to rain on anybody's parade unless they exceed Travis's quotient of being a jerk. Um, the people that you meet, you'll end up knowing for a long time. The business even is a small business, and you want to be inclusive. You want to create. We talk about the community. It really is a community, and I enjoy it. I enjoy hanging out in this community.
And I pinch myself. I'm very fortunate to not only have you as a business partner, but mentor, and now consider a good friend. I want to wrap it up with a couple more questions because again, this was more to get to know you, your history, kind of what inspired you. Not so much about the future of the industry per se, but what I am curious about is if I am a young aspiring media innovation entrepreneur, what advice would you give people that wanted to explore innovation in media, and what are some either like resources or things that inspired you that you can kind of pass down to them as nuggets of wisdom or advice that you would just give them in general?
Did you ever see the movie The Graduate?
Mm-hmm.
And you remember the iconic scene where the father says, "I'm going to tell you one word: plastics."
Yeah.
I'm going to give you the one word: Google. Now, not why you think. I can't tell you starting from the late 90s through yesterday, how many people I end up connecting with who start out by saying, we're the first people or we're the only organization to ever do such and such. And I go, no, you're not. What about, if you're starting a venture and you have an idea, just go onto Google and put in a 5-word description of what you're doing and see what comes back. Because 99% of the time, there have been 5 companies before you that tried to do what you're doing, and maybe the bandwidth wasn't there. Yep. Maybe the online payment system wasn't there. Maybe the pieces weren't right. But there's very few things that you're going to do that that somebody else hasn't tried in some form. And the story I used to tell was when I was at EMI, companies would come in to see me and they would say, we're the first people to ever do whatever. And I go, actually, when I came in the lobby to meet you, to bring you back to my office, and I said goodbye to that other group of people, they're doing the same thing you're doing. And they were also telling me they're the first people to ever do what I said. So if we hurry, we could probably catch them downstairs in the garage at valet parking, and you guys should all go out to lunch together. Maybe merge, maybe collaborate, maybe go back to working for your parents. I don't know. But it's amazing. Whenever people tell me how amazing iTunes was, I said iTunes was amazing, but it was even more amazing as Rioport and as Music Match and as Liquid Audio. Apple, Steve Jobs was an amazing marketer and an amazing mainstreamer of concepts. There were tablets before the iPad. Compact had it. There was HP had a tablet. There was a company called Go, but I can't remember the correct name of it. It
came and went. That's for sure.
It can go, stop. Yeah, right. No go. By the way, as a complete aside, one of the greatest things that when we're doing international business, Chevy came out with with a car in Mexico, and the car failed drastically. They introduced the Chevy Nova into Mexico, and Nova in Spanish, Nova means doesn't go. So it was the Chevy Nova, doesn't go. Anyway, also know the local language. So I always say to people, take a look at what people did before. Look at what their mistakes were.
Mm-hmm.
Look at what the inhibitors were. Maybe they made no mistakes at all. It just wasn't. It needed more bandwidth. It needed a bigger installed base of potential customers. Whatever the inhibitors were, see if those inhibitors have gone away. if there were mistakes, try and see what the mistakes were, and basically use that to grow with. Apple did an amazing job of that. I mean,
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, it's another long story, so I won't go into the long. Apple got very good at whatever they put out. People believed that nobody had ever done it before, and they were getting the first. There were iPods before the iPod. There were video players before the video iPod. Just really look at how does it resonate, and in most cases, try and put it in the hands of a friend that has no idea what you're doing, and ask them what they think.
Yeah, I would even even a stranger.
A stranger.
Right?
Yeah,
friend's going to try to be supportive.
Yeah, I mean that's the other thing. I get into all these life lessons. One of the things I've learned is, the great thing about the internet is it created this level playing field, and the terrible thing about the internet is it's created this level playing field,
right?
Where you're competing against everybody, and you're trying to get everyone's attention. So, what makes you different? What's your story? What's your unique feature? Build on that. Collaborate, see who's out there, and see who you can do things with. And like I said, learn from other people's mistakes or learn from the inhibitors, and then have smart people around you. And people putting a company together is like putting a band together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about having a great lead singer, but it's having a great lead singer that you want to go out and have a drink with afterwards.
Right. That's true.
And that's the problem sometimes. When I watch companies fail, it's because they had the best and the brightest, but they basically had people that none of them wanted to be in the same room with each other.
Mm.
Luckily, with the pandemic, we don't have to be. So, like, you and I are getting along so much better.
So two more questions.
No, we have a great, it's great. I mean, for those of you who don't know about MediaTech Ventures, and this isn't a commercial, it's a great bunch of people, and it's people that you can go, no, you're full of shit. And they'll go, okay, so I am, and you are too. And now what do you want to talk about?
Thank you for demystifying what we actually do on a day-to-day basis.
No, you have to have this thing. So the other thing, and I was vamping for a second because there was the second part of it. I'm going, where was this going? Because the internet gives you this level playing field and direct access. If you're a band, you can put your own album out, and there's nobody in an A&R department telling you your album isn't good.
That's right.
Sometimes it's good to have somebody tell you your album isn't good. Go back and work on it. Or if you're putting out your own book, you're self-publishing, a book editor tells you, first 3 chapters are great. Chapter 4, you're losing me. You need to go back and work on chapter 4 again. So again, when you said talk to strangers, go to strangers. Show them what you're doing. Ask them to be, don't destroy you, but be as brutal as possible. Learn from this input. I mean, you have access now to some of the greatest minds in the world. And if if you see somebody that needs to be mentored, help them. If you need a mentor, how do I say? I joke that Jewish guilt goes a long way with me. So if someone says to me, can I call you? And I say yes, and they call me and I go, look, I can't talk right now. How about tomorrow? And they call me the next day and I go, I know I said today, but I'm really slammed. Understand that I really do want to talk to you.
Yeah.
So there's a way to go, hey, so what would work good for you? How about Friday as opposed to, but you promised you talked to me this morning.
Right.
I did. It turns out I'm really a jerk and you shouldn't be talking to me.
That's right. So two more questions because we are wrapping up here. If you had a superhero power, what would it be?
Oh God, if I had a superhero power. The ability to answer questions much shorter than I do. Seriously. No one will believe that John and I agreed that I would give like 1-minute answers to everything. I can't.
Well, I
realized I'm incapable. I'm incapable.
You're going to be surprised how many questions we actually got in this interview. So the last question, if you're going with Captain Brevity, I'm okay with that.
Yes.
Last question is, how do people get a hold of you, and why would somebody reach out to Ted Cohen?
I love work. I mean, the parallel that brings all of this together is the first half of my career was evangelizing music and helping artists become big artists. The second half of my career has been evangelizing technology and helping small companies become big companies, or helping big companies stop taking themselves too seriously and reinvent themselves. So I really enjoy watching products evolve, watching people collaborate, And so, as somebody wrote in an email to one of my current clients, you're hiring Ted because he's going to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. The same way I would say to David Lee Roth, you talk too much. I will say to a tech company, this interface is a disaster, and it's not me. I've shown it to 5 people. Nobody can figure out. You've made it. I know maybe your mom likes it, but this doesn't work. So I do a lot of tweaking. It's good to have an outside perspective. Everything I've talked about with you has led me to, somebody said to me one day, so what is your skill set? And I go, I'm an enlightened generalist. I know enough about what everybody does in the workflow, in the supply chain, in the product development thing, to give informed opinion, not like, have you ever thought of doing it this way? But really, giving, why don't you try this? Even now, with 3D printers, you can prototype a physical thing to take a look at it and 3D print it, where you used to have to hire somebody to create tools and dies and milling and whatever to create a prototype. We're in a great place right now. I think everyone would agree that the pandemic has actually caused us to do more work, more introspection, more collaboration than we did in the physical world, because we're not commuting anywhere. We're not driving to work. We're not going out to lunch. We're not leaving to go to a meeting. We're basically, from the time we wake up at 7 in the morning till when we go to bed at 7 in the morning, we're working. And we're working 24 hours a day. I mean, when Jarreau, who we talk to all the time at California, it's 9 hours difference. And right now I'm in LA and John's in Chicago, and it's 2 hours difference. So there are conversations that happen at midnight or 3 in the morning, because that's the best time for all of us to communicate.
And it's also the reason why I no longer have clients in India. So
yeah, then you have to figure out that half-hour thing.
That's right. So
anyway, this has been great. I hope, again, I broke my promise to give short answers.
No, it was all, there's a lot to unpack. You've had an incredible career, and you continue to, and obviously there's still a lot that needs to be done. And there's plenty of other interviews that people can go to get your opinion on the future of the industry and where that's going. So I didn't want to focus on that too much. But yeah, this is, again, another great episode. I'd like to thank our partners in Sparity for helping us make this happen. And again, if there's people that you believe should be interviewed in the MediaTech community, let us know. Send me an email at john@mediatech.ventures. We're happy to take all considerations. Everybody's got an interesting story and an interesting story to tell. So
and to reach me, it's Ted@mediatech.ventures. You asked about how to get a hold of me. Send me an email and just be gentle if I don't get back to you immediately. I will get back to you. Guilt really rides heavily on me.
Awesome. Appreciate it, brother. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is great.